Hey everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here with my wrap up for December of 2021, which getting closer. Every time I get a little bit closer. I read how many books? I don't know. I read this nice stack in December. All books that I owned, which is a good thing. Most of these came off of my TBR list, which also a good thing. December was a productive reading month, so let's just get into them. And in my genius, I stacked them in order of how I read them from the bottom. So I'm just working from the bottom up here, which I'm brilliant. So we're just gonna flip it over and pretend like that's normal. I have reviews for all of these that I literally just sat down and wrote 2 hours ago, so I remember what I rated them at least, if nothing else. The first thing that I read was The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. I gave this 4 stars. This is an adult contemporary. This is an adult novel set over an extended period of time, so perhaps not super contemporary, about a group of friends who went to like an artsy summer camp together. One of them is into animation, one of them's a dancer, one of them's into like comedy acting, etc., etc. They're just like a group of artsy people. And it just follows them throughout their lives as their friend group changes, as they do, friend things. And it starts when they're children. So they do act very childish, very immature. And then as they grow up, you really see them change and you see how their changes affect their friend group and how they interact with each other. And it's kind of just like this really slow, drawn out, like long form character study, or not character study, group study. It's just like about their interpersonal relationships, and I found it fascinating. Like, this is exactly the kind of book I like. I just studying these people and their lives and like who they are and what they do and how they change, and like I find it really, really fascinating. Like, this is one of those books where it's just entirely about the characters. So you have to have really well-developed characters because there's not much of a plot. Like, things happen, but it's not the things that happen that push the story along. It's who the characters are and like just what they do and just like what happens to them and just who they are as people is really just like the entire crux of this book. Like, they're really not all like good people or doing the right thing. They're just living their lives, doing negative things, like making bad choices, being petty, being jealous, being small-minded, like, and also being like sweet sometimes and just like being open with each other. And like, I don't know, it covers like kind of the whole spectrum because this book really is just like capturing their lives, and I really enjoyed that. I do feel though that this isn't a book for everyone. Like, this is very much geared towards me. This is the exact kind of book I like. I love that it's really slow and long and drawn out. I love that it's just about the characters and there's basically no plot. I just love everything about it. But I do think a lot of people would be put off by how slow it is, by how like petty the characters can be at times. Like, they feel really real, but it also means they can be really annoying sometimes. But like, I don't know, if you like the same kind of books as me, if you like the way I talk about things, I highly recommend this. I thought it was wonderful. My cats are harassing each other across the room because they're both in here with me, which is great, but fantastic book. I really love this. Like, this just made me want to read everything Meg Wolitzer has written. I have no idea what else she's written, but it was like very much, this is a book for me, and I don't know, I loved it. Then I read Girls Like Us by Lloyd. This is a book about sex trafficking. Lloyd herself was a victim of, as she puts it, commercial sexual exploitation. I don't read it off the back to be like condescending towards that. I just don't ever remember that term. I tried and I have to read it. So this book is kind of, I gave this how many stars? I gave this 2 or 3 stars. I gave this book 3 stars. I decided to go with like the benefit of the doubt because it's just a book about sex trafficking, and I was kind of like, let's just go with the benefit of the doubt here. Let's give it a little extra credit. Not saying it was bad, but like I was definitely on the fence between 2 and 3 stars. This is just about sex trafficking. I said that. My reviews and descriptions of these books just get worse every time I try to film a video. Essentially, I think this book could be split into thirds. Not like separate thirds because they're all interspersed together, but like there are three distinct things this book is doing. The first is telling Rachel Lloyd's story. She goes into her past, her background, her experiences as a victim of sexual commercial exploitation. So it's partially about that. She also now works for a nonprofit. Actually, I think she created the nonprofit, GEMS, Girls Education and Mentoring Services, that's based in New York, I believe. And it's about her experiences trying to help other girls who are victims of sex trafficking, mostly children. She tends to focus on like the 12 to 20 age range. And then the final third is kind of just like general information on sex trafficking, like statistics. Sometimes she goes to talks, things like that. And it's just like overall general factual information that would be like good to know. So I feel like that was kind of one of my main issues with this book. Like it's not a very long book, and it contains probably like in equal parts all three of those things, which doesn't give it a lot of time or depth to like really go into them. And it makes them all feel kind of flat. Like you don't really get enough information about any of those different topics to really get like a full-fledged story about them. You know, like none of them are enough on their own to carry a book, and together they wind up feeling very disjointed and like separate, and they don't really work together because they're not super tied in together, apart from like obviously they all coexist, but they just don't have anything to do with each other, and they're just like three separate stories going along in the book at a time. I really found myself wishing that she just picked one of those things to focus on, like whether she focused on like her nonprofit or her own history and just tied in the other elements in with that main focus. But I feel like this book really did just need like one thing to kind of like be the crux of the story, and this book didn't really have one. It was just kind of like everything jumbled together, and I think the structure let it down a lot. That was the only thing I wrote in my Goodreads review, but I do remember having other issues with this, which like I don't know why I just wrote like a terrible Goodreads review, because that's not helping me review it here at all. I also had an issue with how she talked about her nonprofit work, because it wound up being a lot of lists of like things that happened to these girls. She would like say one thing. I'm trying to see if there's an example in here. I can't find an example because I didn't write things down. But she would make a statement, like kind of a broad sweeping statement about like sex trafficking, like girls who are sexually, commercially exploited, whatever, are often brought into it by someone close to them. This is not something she said. I'm making this up as an example. And she would say, like Crystal, who XYZ reason, like Amber, XYZ reason. Like, you know, she would go down the list of examples and list like 8 or 10 girls, you know, and just, she did that a lot, and I get what she was trying to do. She was using that information to shock and horrify and just be like, there are so many easy examples I can pull of this, of these girls who are 12, who are 13, who are 14, who are children being involved in this, who've had so many bad experiences. And she was using that information to shock and horrify in like a good way. Like she wasn't trying to be like an edgelord like you kind of get in books sometimes, where they're just trying to go over the top with the shocking. She was using it for a good reason, but it wound up getting kind of boring, and it kind of numbed you to what happened, because she didn't go into a lot of greater detail on any of these things. It was just like lists of like one specific piece of information, and you weren't getting full stories, you were getting like little tidbits. And I wasn't the biggest fan. Like I get why she used it a couple times, but she did go back to that a lot and like used it kind of repeatedly whenever she was talking about her nonprofit, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. I think she and I also had some differences when it comes to like sex trafficking as a whole. she definitely has a negative view of sex work, and when I say sex work, I don't mean sex trafficking. I mean people who are in it willingly, who have chosen that, not children, not people who've been coerced. And her argument was that everyone involved in sex trafficking has been coerced, and I can understand that argument, but I disagree. There was kind of a lot of that and a lot of that discussion in this book, and it definitely would have bothered me more had this book not specifically been about children. Like, if she'd been talking more about adults, that would have been more of like an issue for me, but because it was children, it was kind of like, well, this is a whole separate discussion over here, so we don't really need to focus on that. We can focus on the things we agree on. So, kind of had an issue with that. And I mean, I don't entirely disagree. This is kind of unrelated to book review as a whole. But, like, it's not that I disagree that sex work is coerced by nature. It's more that I agree if you take the word sex out of that, all work is coerced by nature in our capitalist society. If you're going to that argument, it's not specific to sex work. It's just as a whole. But again, different argument, entirely different discussion that's unrelated. But I didn't super love this book. I didn't get a lot out of it. I don't think there's much to learn from it, and I don't think it's really that touching because it does have such a broad scope of everything. So I don't know. Not a huge fan. I'm probably going to be unhauling it. I do feel like there's something for some people to get out of this. I just personally wasn't super impressed. Then I read After Anna by Alex Lake. This is an adult thriller. It's about a woman whose daughter is kidnapped, and then the nightmare begins. The real nightmare starts when her daughter is returned, according to the tagline, which I don't super agree with because her daughter spends half of this book being kidnapped, and like the rest of the book is just like the second half, which somewhat irritated me. But it's basically she's concerned about losing her daughter after her daughter is returned to her. I gave this 2 stars. Not a fan. Again, partially irritated by that beginning. Just like, I knew her daughter was returned safely after the kidnapping. Like, the tagline literally tells you that her daughter is returned after the kidnapping. So like, I spent the first half of that book just waiting for it to happen to get to like the real part of the story, you know, as I was kind of thinking of it. And that was literally the entire first half of the book. So I kind of wished it'd been less focused on that in the synopsis and everything. Because, like, I'm not making it up. Like, literally, the synopsis, not very long. The third sentence of the synopsis is, but the biggest mystery is yet to come. 1 week after she was abducted, Anna is returned. And then it goes on, it's like, that's just the beginning of the nightmare. And I'm like, well, that's halfway through the book, so it's clearly not the beginning. It's a minor thing, but it irritates me when, like, you go in with the wrong expectations because the synopsis misleads you. But I could have gotten past that, but I really just didn't like the story. This is one of those books, I don't think it was a bad book. Like, there are thrillers where I'll be like, I thought this was actual trash. And, like, I didn't for this. I felt like it was well written. It just definitely wasn't the book for me. It made me cringe a lot, like almost a secondhand embarrassment type cringe. Because you could see the trap the mother was falling into. It was so obvious. It was so just like, you could see her making the mistakes that people wanted her to make. And you could see her just falling into this trap so obviously. And even the mother could see it and kept like doing it anyway. And I was just like, oh my God, please stop. Like, I can't handle it. And like, just so cringe. And I don't mean like in a bad writing sort of way. I just mean like personally, if I'm getting like secondhand embarrassment from something, I have to turn it off. And I was kind of getting that feeling from this book. So like, definitely not for me. And then I found it really obvious who the kidnapper was. There aren't very many characters. So like, it was kind of clear from the beginning who it was going to be and exactly what their motivations were. So there wasn't much for me to like be interested in since I wasn't liking the characters or the story very much. What draws me into thrillers if I don't like those aspects are like having questions about like what's going to happen. And I kind of knew that. So I found this book kind of like tired and boring and like, I don't know, not for me, but I do understand why people would like it. I think it's well written. I think if it doesn't make you cringe the way I cringed, then you'd probably enjoy it more than me. And it definitely like made me angry in a way it was trying to make me angry, so it succeeded there. I just didn't enjoy the feelings it was trying to bring out in me. I guess that's a good way of saying it. Like, I think it was succeeding in how it was trying to make me feel. I just didn't enjoy those feelings. So, not a fan. I'll be unhauling it, but like, this is a book I feel like some people would like, just not me. Then I read Unbelievable by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong. This is a nonfiction book, and a nonfiction adult book about a woman, she was 18, a stranger broke into her home and raped her. She went to the police, she did, everything that you're like supposed to do, and people didn't believe her. Her foster mother didn't believe her, the police didn't believe her, and she was essentially bullied into recanting her confession. And then years later, and then she was arrested for it, just to like add to that. And then years later, detectives in an entirely different precinct were investigating a serial rapist, and they discovered that she was one of the serial rapist victims. And the book is just kind of about her and about the investigation itself into the serial rapist and the whole situation, which was bad. This is a great book. I gave it 4 stars. This is just like an amazing investigative journalism book. Like, if you like investigative journalism, oh my god, was this impressive. Like, the amount of information these 2 people found, the amount of information they had and uncovered, and like, it's impressive. Like, when I was in college, I didn't study journalism, but I took some journalism classes, and one of them was specifically a news gathering class where like, we didn't really write anything. We were just focused on like how you find information and stuff, and I loved that class. It was one of my favorites. And that's like pretty much what this book was. It was just like, look at everything we found about this case, all the detectives, the information on their lives, their investigation, the information on the victims and what they were feeling and what they went through and their trauma, the information on the rapist himself, and like his perspective was in this book. Like, it was impressive. Amazing. I talk about that because that's like honestly like the best part of this book is just how much information they had, and you get like the most full picture of this entire case. It was amazing. It was also tragic. Like, it's horrifying to read. It's just like the most awful thing. Like, this poor girl not only went through the trauma of being assaulted and attacked like that, but also the trauma of no one believing her, being bullied and gaslit until she didn't believe herself, and then being arrested for lying about it when she was telling the truth the whole time. Like, it was awful. It was definitely a hard book to read. It scared me. It piqued my anxiety so bad. But in like a good way. Like, if you don't feel bad while reading this book, then like you're doing something wrong, Like, I would highly recommend this if you can stomach it. It is really graphic and really hard to read. I do think for me, some of the writing was a little bit very standard news writing, and I think for a book, they could have livened it up a little bit, because some of it was dry. It was very much like, here's a quote, person, information, fact, Like, it was very like generic news writing, some of it. And I think it could have been like a little bit more flowing. And it focused more on the cops than I expected it to, which I really shouldn't have, because the tagline of this is, the last sentence of the tagline is, "This is the story of 2 detectives' relentless search for the truth," which is like, it's clearly about the cops. That was my bad, but it's a really great book that I would highly recommend. I'd wanted to read this for a long time, and it's just one of those books that, like, so glad I did. It's so worthwhile. It's just like, great book. Then I read Daughter of the Reich by Louise. Fein. This is an adult historical fiction book. I think it's adult. It is about a teenager. I'm gonna say it's adult. It read like adult. Set during the Holocaust in Germany in the 40s. It's about a German girl whose father is fairly high up in the Nazi regime, and she's completely bought into the Nazi regime. She thinks Hitler's great. And one of her older brother's friends is a Jewish boy, and kind of like they start growing apart throughout time, and then it's a romance between her and the boy, and kind of her coming of age and kind of like learning to think for herself, and very much romance. I gave this 4 stars. It was a good book. It flowed really, really well. Like, it was just one of those books. It was well written and the story flowed so well. And that was just like kind of why it got 4 stars for me. I love when things flow really smoothly. I love when you're just like enthralled by it. Even if it's not like the best thing, it's just like it keeps you engaged through like the style of it and the structure, and it was really, really great in that regard. I do think for me, too much romance. I didn't realize quite how heavy this book was on the romance when I picked it up. Like, I knew there was an important romantic element, but I didn't realize that was like the main plot of the story, which it really was here. Not the biggest fan of that. I kind of like romance as like an important secondary element, but not like the main plot. Everything else in this book was either secondary to or supported the romance, which it is what it is. If you like that kind of thing, I think this book is great. I do think also my other negative thing was kind of just like a lot of the secondary elements fell flat. Like, the romance was really well done, the characters involved in the romance, like the main plot, really well done, really well developed. Everything else seemed much flatter. Like, she had a relationship with her best friend that was really interesting and I wanted to know more, but it just never seemed like it got fully developed the way like the romance did. And not just because of a lack of screen time, but because, or page time, whatever. You know what I mean. It just needed more depth to it. And I think all of the secondary elements in the book were lacking that. So, not really my favorite there, but I still think it was a really good book. It's one I would recommend. If this is your kind of thing, I think you'd really enjoy this. So, there's always that. Then I read Comeback by Claire Fontaine and Mia Fontaine. Not looking forward to talking about this one. I really, really hated it. 2 stars. Didn't give it 1 because I was just like, I don't feel quite that strongly, but like 2 stars. And I hate talking about it because it's been so long since I read it. It's March now. Towards the end of March, actually. Read it in December, and it's just like, I don't remember enough details to truly like trash it the way I feel like it deserves. So like, I feel bad saying things that I felt and then not being able to like substantiate them with evidence from the text. If I trash a book, I want to be able to like really illustrate what I hated, and I can't. This is a nonfiction book written by mother and daughter about a teen girl's years. I don't want to say rebellious because I feel like that undersells it. She ran away from home. She did a lot of drugs. She was a danger to herself, essentially. Like, I don't know if she was like addicted to drugs, but she was in a spiral of like self-destruction, like really bad. Intervention was needed. And the mother decided to send her to a behavioral modification school in the Czech Republic. And this is about that and the great experience they had there. And even though the school was shut down for child abuse while the girl was there, it was a great school, and the only traumatizing thing was that it was shut down, apparently. Not a fan. First of all, the school. The owners of that school had previously had another behavioral modification school that was also shut down for child abuse in an entirely different country, also not America, because that kind of thing's not legal here. Not that it couldn't happen here, but it's definitely illegal here. So that seemed questionable at best. And if you Google these things, in the book, Claire and Mia Fontaine said that like all the abuse allegations were retracted and no one really thought they were abused, and like all the kids loved it there. If you Google them, that's like blatantly not true. There's still a lot of abuse allegations floating around, and people who blame the school for like previous students, I don't know if students is the right word, the children who attended there killing themselves later, there's blame for that. Like, it's dark. I didn't really get super into that, but like there's definitely a lot of stuff still floating around, and like I don't think it deserves to be dismissed the way it was in this book. But beyond that, there was a lot more to this book. I was really interested in the daughter's perspective here. Like, that was kind of what I cared about, and you get a lot more from the mother. Like, it felt like the mother wrote this book and then the daughter like interjected some thoughts and had to include her experiences to make this book like function. as a story, because she was clearly the one who went to this school and other schools like it and like had these experiences. But the focus definitely seemed to be on the mother, which I didn't like. And also the mother seemed like not a great human being, seemed like not a great parent. Lots of questions there. She was very, very judgy. In a minute, I'm gonna get into like the serious things, but let's start with the more minor things. Mother was not a fan of like many things. She seemed very controlling. She used like Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols, or Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols, as an example of how her daughter was going downhill. She was like, my teenage daughter really likes reading books about Johnny Rotten. Like, he's, you know, polluting her brain. I can't think of words right now. But essentially, it was that. And I was like, it's Johnny Rotten. Like, Johnny Rotten's pretty okay. And like, she would also just go off on clothes and be like, these clothes are disgusting. These are druggy clothes. And I'm like, they're clothes. Like, just because you don't like them doesn't mean they're worn by drug addict. Like, and she put her daughter in an expensive private school because, in her words, public schools were full of gangbangers and slutty girls. And I was like, you're aware that you're talking about children here, right? Like, these are just the examples that I still remember. She just like went off on a lot of things. She didn't like a lot of her daughter's friends. Whenever her daughter did bad things, like, she always like blamed specific friends that she didn't like. She'd be like, this friend's a Wiccan, so like it's clearly all her fault. And I was like, it seems like your daughter's the ringleader here. Like, lots of judgy things like that. Not a fan. She also, on different occasions, referred to her daughter as a bitch and a whore. And I'm like, your child daughter, your minor daughter, who is 15 in this book, 14 to 15 to 16 towards the end, I think. How do you look at her and be like, wow, my daughter's a whore? And I'm like, that disgusts me. Like, I can't imagine talking about your daughter like this, and not only talking about her like this, but writing it down in a book that you're publishing that, like, you know she's going to see. Like, I don't know, like, it was pretty awful. Like, that was just like, I read those things and I was like, you're talking about your daughter. Like, I don't really have words for that, because that kind of took me by surprise quite a bit. And she also said things about how, like, she didn't want to be her mother anymore. She hated her. And, like, this is the mother talking, not the drug-addicted child. So, yeah. And the other thing that really irritated me, I mean, there was a lot. Because, again, of all the things about the mother, there was a lot more of that. That's just the stuff that I remember 3 months later. But trust me, like, this whole book is full of it. And also, like, the whole reform school thing, or the behavioral modification program they were in, was, like, incredibly culty. It made me uncomfortable. I was like, if it helps them, that's great, you know? Like, I don't want to judge what helps other people live better lives. But it was very culty. And just from, like, a structural writing standpoint, the other thing that really irritated me about this book is at the very beginning, her daughter runs away. Like, that's where it starts, with her daughter running away for the first time. And she's like, but why would my daughter do this? She was so happy. She came from a happy family. There were no hints of this. There was nothing that I could have, like, guessed that this would ever happen. She seemed like she was doing so well in life, and, like, she was good in school, and her life was going great. And I was like, okay, valid. Like, some parents think that of their children. But then as the book went along, she was like, oh yeah, in the months before she ran away, she'd been self-harming. She'd been withdrawn. Her mood had gotten darker. She had changed. I put her in therapy because I was worried about her. And I was like, you just said she was happy and everything was good. Like, I feel lied to here. Like, genuinely, as a reader, I feel like my trust has been just immediately betrayed. And then it went on further, and she was like, oh yeah, she was horrifically sexually abused as a child by her biological father. And I was like, and she wasn't in therapy this whole time? Like, one of the therapists literally told her mother that she should be in therapy, like, throughout her childhood. And the mother was like, she seems fine now. I think we're good. I was like, but, yeah, not a fan. I really wish I remembered more details about this book, that I could read you all the awful quotes, but pretty much the only things I could find at this point was when she called her daughter a bitch, which, her 15-year-old child, I don't have words. Don't recommend. I thought this was awful. I thought the mother was awful. But I hope the daughter's doing well now. That's pretty much all I've got to say. I'm going to be unhauling this. I really don't recommend reading it because I thought it was awful. And then on to a happier book. I read Most Likely by Sarah Watson. This was another arc. I forgot to mention Daughter of the Reich was also an arc. I got these when I used to work in a bookstore. I've been trying to get through them just to like purge them if I don't want them. This I picked up not because I was interested in it, but because once upon a time I was going to host a book club and that didn't happen. COVID things, I got fired, whatever. Unrelated. But I didn't pick up this book because I was interested in it. I kept putting it off because it didn't sound good to me. This is a YA contemporary about a group of 4 friends pictured on the cover in their senior year of high school. And one of them is going to become the first female president of the United States. And it's kind of about the 4 of them. And as a reader, you're kind of guessing which one is going to be the first female president. And I was like, this doesn't sound like my kind of thing. I'm not interested. I might unhaul it before I read it. And I was like, no, I don't like doing that because I might like the book. It might surprise me. This was great. Like, I'm so glad I read this. This was so much fun. This is exactly the kind of YA contemporary I like. I didn't like the president thing. I thought that was gimmicky and cheap and not enjoyable. It's just like unnecessary to the story. Like, the president thing is pretty much only relevant in the prologue and the epilogue. It's kind of like, because that's where she's doing her inaugural address. So that part takes place in the future. And the rest of the book is just this lovely, heartwarming YA book about this group of friends going through their senior year of high school, and they have issues with each other and they have issues in their lives and they're struggling and growing apart and growing together, and it's just really, really nice and lovely. And like, the president thing was like this cheap add-on to like sell the book, it felt like, because the rest of the book was just so genuine and so real, and just I loved all the characters. They were all so well developed. It was just like this really great YA contemporary. I will probably reread this in a few years. Like, I'm definitely keeping it. I highly, highly recommend picking this up. Like, it was so good. Like, it was so well written. The characters were great. Everything about this book was just so, so good. And I don't know. I'm really glad I read it. I gave it 4 stars. It made me cry a little at the end. It's light and it's happy, but it's also like serious enough for me to like feel actual depth and like there are stakes here, which is something I struggle with lighter contemporaries. And I feel like this straddled the line between like it's light and it's happy and like you pretty much know things are going to work out to some degree, but it's also like real. It's not like super fluffy, and I loved it. Like, I don't know, I highly recommend it. Great book. Makes me want to look more by Sarah Watson, but I want to say this was her debut. Yeah, but this was just like great, happy making, loved it. The other thriller I read this month was Only Daughter by Snoekstra. This is about a family. Their daughter went missing 11 years before, and now an imposter has come into their home and is pretending to be the daughter. And you get the perspective of the imposter, so that's not like a spoiler. It's just like about what happened to the daughter. Like, there are dark secrets here. Like, not all is as it seems. Is the imposter now in danger because she might be like her sister, or might be the sister or the daughter? Like, it's generic thrillery. 2 stars. I didn't really like it. This one is hard for me to talk about just because like it was so nothing to me. Like, I have no thoughts on this. I have no interesting things to say about this. It was like very generic, very bland, very mediocre thriller. The things that happened were really flat. The characters were flat. Like, it didn't really offer anything interesting. I wasn't really guessing at what happened because I didn't really care. And I was kind of thinking I might give it 3 stars because like it was fine. But then I got to the end and there was just like this animal abuse, and like I didn't like the ending, and it just left like this bitter taste in my mouth, and I didn't really like it. It ended on such a sour note. I was just like, ugh. And that's all I remember from this book, really. Even though like originally like the first like 2/3 of it I thought were like generic and bland and boring, but like fine. And then the end of this was just like, ugh, like why? I didn't like it. I don't recommend it. I'm gonna unhaul this and I'm never gonna think about it again. SVU did this plot and it was a lot more interesting on the 45-minute episode of SVU than it ever was in this book, so I don't know. I feel bad just because, like, I have no real thoughts on this. I can't really, like, critique it. It was just, like, such an book, and it was just, like, it ended so, like, That's my thought on this. Anyway, I didn't want to end 2021 on that book, because that was just such a, like, oh my god, kill me moment, you know? Like, it wasn't even, like, the worst thing. Like, I don't have strong feelings about it like I did Comeback. Only Daughter was just kind of nothing, and kind of gross, but mostly nothing. So I decided to reread one of my favorites, All the Rage by Courtney Summers. This is a YA contemporary about a girl who was raped by the sheriff's son, and then another girl in her community goes missing who's tied to, like, both her and the rapist. And it's not a thriller. It's got some thriller elements, but it's like a really dark contemporary, and I gave it 5 stars. Again, I love Courtney Summers. This is like such a great book. This is my favorite of Courtney Summers books, and I've given all of her books that I've read so far 5 stars. So that should tell you something. The writing is amazing. I love Courtney Summers' writing style. It's just breathtaking. Like, I read her books and I'm just turning page after page. Like, I cannot breathe. I cannot think. I'm entirely sucked into this book. Like, nothing in the outside world exists to me. I'm like borderline hallucinating, it feels like, 'cause this is the only thing that exists. And I read it all in one sitting again, which I'm pretty sure is what I did before. And it's great. Like, I love it. I think it's wonderful. I love Romy, who's the main character. She's so heartbreaking and so real, and it's just like painful, but in like the most exquisite way. And it's just, I can't talk about this book in terms of like what it is in reality and like the specific things, because like it just exists as this like stunning piece of literature to me. Like, I can't like pick out different things in it because it's all just so good, and the way I experience it is just like entirely engrossing and overwhelming that like I'm so bad at reviewing things sometimes. It's so good. Like, I recommend this. Like, read this. Read Courtney Summers. She's great. If you like these kind of books, she's wonderful. So that was what I read in December. A few books from my unhaul pile, a few new really great books and authors that I'm excited for, and yeah, I was really happy with my reading in December. I think I did great. So let me know down below if you read any of these books, what you thought of them if you have, and I will be back shortly with a new video. I've been kind of consistent the last month in doing videos, so fingers crossed that stays. As always, thank y'all so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.